may think that it's over, that your life is done.
The best
oh my,
is yet to come.
Don't sweat the challenge. Your battle's already won. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Is yet to come.
Listen, y'all. See, God writes the end.
Somebody hold your hand. That's what makes our God awesome, because He keeps us in all of those times. So for just for a second, I would encourage you to just, in your own way, would you just give God your best praise? Listen, not for me. Word with you. I pray that it will encourage you, because it is something that God shared with me that has really helped me. So if you have your Bible, turn to Exodus. We're going to start right at verse 5. If you're able to stand, I pray that you'll stand in the presence of God and reverence to it. I'm reading from the English Standard Version. After we read the scripture, in your Bible, you'll find these words. Exodus chapter 1, starting in verse 5. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pittman, Ramesses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. You may be seated. The more they were oppressed, verse 12, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. The Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. Heavenly Father, God, we once again are just so humble. We're so grateful to be in your presence, in your house of worship. put into an oppressed position. If you think back to Abraham and the promise that God made to him, this is not out of the norm. If you think about where they were in their oppression as they moved through the times of Abraham, Isaac, and now into Jacob. Jacob is now the father, he is the patriarch of the Israelite children. And so his name from Jacob is being transferred and transformed into Israel, which makes sense now for the Israelites to be the descendants of Jacob. And so now here you have them in Egypt, and even though they're chosen, God has vowed to provide for them, they're still dealing with the nuances of life. And so because they find themselves operating out of the alliance and the alignment that God had called for them as his chosen people, they now are experiencing some barrenness. Remember, some hard times. There was not enough food in Egypt, in their land of Israel. And so they moved from that land. Remember, Joseph got thrown into the well by his own brothers, and God used Joseph to put the future in place. See, he was already working it out for his people by using Joseph to be put into a place, to go into captivity, to eventually move him to a place of hierarchy, because he knew there was going to be a point in time that he was going to have to intervene in the people's life, but he was still going to provide and cover his people. And so as Israel, as Jacob's children and his descendants find themselves lining up with the plan that God has for them, there still was some stuff they had to deal with. There was some oppression, there was some depression, there was some anxiety issues, there was all kind of stuff they was having to deal with before they can get to the true blessings that God had for them. And as they move down that path, and they find themselves dealing with the famine and the barrenness of that land, Joseph now is put in a position to be a blessing to his family. And so, and you read the story for yourself, as they now are brought to Egypt, looking for food from the one who at one point in time was cast aside in the family. That's who I'm talking to. You don't know who you're going to be, how you're going to be a blessing to your family. And even though it may look like you're the outcast, or you're the one cast aside, or you're being ignored, you could be the very one that eventually become the one feeding them. But what I loved about Joseph was, even though that was who he was, and God had put him in place to be that one for his people, he never held it against them. Even though they mistreated him, he never held it against them. He did exactly what God had put him in place to do. And so because of his obedience, all this time now has passed, and Joseph and all the family of Joseph and his daddy and his brothers and all of their descendants now are 70. They are now in Egypt, now living in the blessings of God, the favor of God. And now, because of Joseph's obedience and following God, he is now in a great relationship with the king. Right. Him and Pharaoh, they boys. The king, even though they had different practices and different beliefs, and the Hebrews believed this and the Egyptians believed this, it didn't matter, because they had a relationship of mutual respect for each other. And the king said, do your thing, Joseph, you and your family. We got you. Ain't nobody gonna bother you. But even in all of that, you have relationships that you have attached yourself to. There are people that you're living your life for that we think they're gonna always be there. And even though Joseph was the one who really was the lineage, he was the one who was feeding, he was the lifeline really for his family through this process, and he finally dies. And some years now has passed. And remember, they started with the descendants at 7. I'm trying to help somebody understand that when you hang in there long enough, even though they had to deal with some crazy stuff, they're now finding themselves in a positive situation. But as always, the enemy never lets you get too comfortable. He always is going to find a way to try to manipulate the situation back into his favor. But this is what I love about God. Even though that was the trouble that they were starting to experience, they lost their loved ones. They've lost the one who has been providing for them. They've lost the one who's been the protector. They've lost the one who set the stage for values and for their family order or structure. He's provided all of this, and it creates a comfortable situation. You know how it feels when you go to grandma's house? It's just something about grandma's house or granddaddy's house. They kind of, they've been around a long time, and they kind of endured and they weathered the storm, and it's just something about being there that gives you a level of comfort, of ease. Even though all the crazy stuff may be going, it's just something about being there that gives you a peace, a comfort, some security. They've lost that. And so, even though they're looking at a oppressed situation, an oppressed situation, they're facing now a new king. And the new king has no allegiance to Joseph. Matter of fact, the word says he didn't even know Joseph. And so what that means is that the values, the relationship that he had with the Pharaoh prior to him, I don't know nothing about all that. That ain't got nothing to do with me. And he's looking at them, and he's starting to see the blessings. And this is what I want to help some people with today. That because sometimes when you're being pressed, it looks like you're being punished. Sometimes when you're being pressed, it looks like it's for something bad. But sometimes in your pressing, it's really to bless you. And this is what listen, this is what I want to help some people see, and I promise you I'm going to get out of your way, because in your pressing, when you're being pressed, listen, when something is pressed, the inside, what's in it is when you're pressing on it, whatever's inside of it has got to come out. And at some point, depending on what God sees in you, that may determine how much pressure you got to deal with. See, I always say, if you ain't being pressed on, you might start to question how God is looking at you. I'm trying to help some people break through and get to a level of being blessed, because listen, when God is looking at you, he's got a plan for you. He's got stuff for you. He's calling you to do a great work, to live the way he needs you to live so you can get the blessings and experience all that he has for you. But in the meantime, to get you there, you got to be pressed on. And listen, and so in order to experience the blessings of God in dealing with the pressed life, I want to just give you a few things that you need to make sure that you don't lose sight of while you're being pressed. First, you got to remain encouraged during the pressing season. During your pressing season, you can't get discouraged. You have to trust God. You have to believe. Listen, they've lost their leader. They've lost the one who's been providing protection, security, direction, spiritual guidance. They've lost that. And not just him, but all of that generation who set the foundation for them to go forward. But even though they are experiencing that discouraged moment, that level of sadness or stress or anxiety or depression, whatever, or however you want to phrase it, they're going through a period of loneliness or isolation or feeling a loss. Even in the middle of all of that, God is still blessing them. He's still pushing them. He's still pressing them to go forward. And listen, if you look at the word, it says that they still multiply. They were fruitful. Let me get specific. If you look at the text, it says specifically, but the people of Israel, verse 7, were fruitful. Verse 6 It says, then Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation. But there's a transition. They call it, I think, a conjunction or something like that. I'm not an English major, but that means there's some kind of transition. That means that in spite of that, this still happened. See, somebody, listen, I don't know why you're still sitting there, but I want to help you. In spite of the loss, in spite of the struggle, in spite of the hurt, in spite of the pain, they still was fruitful. Still help somebody here. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased. That means even though you're dealing with it, you're still going to be increasing. You're still going to be going forward. You're still going to be moving upward. That's a blessing for somebody because you're dealing with your pain right now. You feel like you're losing. You feel like you're not going forward. But God said, no, don't get it mixed up. Because, yeah, you're dealing with some pressure situations right now. But guess what? It's only so you can go forward. It's only so you can go higher. And so, and even though you're dealing with it, the enemy will try to convince you that it's because something you've done wrong. And listen, at this time, you look at the text, they ain't do nothing wrong. But they're dealing with pressure situations. See, every time you're going through, it ain't because of something negative. It's sometimes God is trying to move you because he knows exactly what's coming. And he don't want you to experience that. But it's going to move you into some discomfortable stuff. It's out of your norm, and you're trying to hang on to an old way of living, an old life. And God said, I need you to get out of that and move away from that so that I can put you in a position that you're elevated to a whole other level. But you're still holding on to stuff because it feels good, that you like it, it's comfortable. I know what I'm doing here. But these people. So the first thing I want to do is I want to encourage you to remain encouraged. You can't get discouraged. I'm not telling you it's not going to be painful. I'm not telling you you're not going to experience heartache. But you have to be encouraged. You have to trust that God is going to do this. Whatever I'm doing, it's got to be for something better. It's got to be an experience for me to move forward. It's got to be. Because his word told me. And so the next thing I want to encourage you is that you got to remember the promises of God. Listen. Not only do you got to remain encouraged, you got to remember the promises of God. And listen, it goes back to the very promise he made to Abraham. He said, if you're obedient to me, and I will make you my people, if you make me your God, and I will multiply you, that they won't even be able to count. They said the grains of sand, the stars in the sky, you'll outnumber. And so, wait a minute, hold on. You're talking about, you got to remember, during this time, there wasn't a heavy population of people. So that is, for us, that would mean much today. But if you got a small group of people, and you're trying to convince me that this small congregation, if we remain obedient, if we do everything God is telling us, that you'll multiply this group to a point that people won't be able to count how many people there are in this membership, in this congregation. I can't, I'm having a hard time. Okay, God, that's hard to fathom, but I trust you. I'm gonna do. And Abraham, in his obedience, trained his children, and they trained their children. I don't know who I'm helping, but the lineage of believing and trusting God was so well kept that and they didn't listen, and they still have their own struggles. I don't want you to think that they was perfect. Abraham wasn't perfect. If you know his story with his wife, they had some stuff going on. But they stayed obedient in their worship, in their belief. They didn't worship idol gods. They stayed obedient to who their God was, and they stayed obedient to worship and serving him. And I want to make sure you don't get it mixed up. That's exactly what we're talking about here. Who is your God? Who are you letting become the person who is in control of your life, who is the head of your life? And this is what we're talking about. And Abraham made a vow to him, and God honored him, not just Abraham, but through Isaac and through Israel and through Jacob. And now here's Joseph, his son, the son of Israel, of Jacob, same person, don't lose nobody, being blessed. And now the descendants of Joseph, the descendants of Joseph's brothers and sisters, all of them are now experiencing the blessing of God. The blessing of God. But this is how you know it's a blessing. Even in all of their obedience, it was still only 70. And then Joseph died. And they started to be obedient and kept the faith and kept trusting and kept serving and kept worshiping God of Israel. And they started to be fruitful. and multiply to over 2 million. That's some growth. That's some growth. So I'm not a mathematician, but I know it ain't 2 plus 2. And so I want to encourage you, listen, remember the promises of God, because he said, listen, heaven and earth will pass away. Heaven and hell will pass away before one word fails. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a reason to shout, because if God spoke it into existence, it's going to happen. And here it is coming to pass that these people are being blessed, they're being multiplied, they're growing, they're being fruitful. And so he encourages them to build relationships around the fact that you are a chosen people. You are a chosen people. In your walk with God, if that is not something to get excited about, I don't know about you, but listen, I love being having the last name Brown, because I know the genealogy. I know how I know how I came to be Brown. I know that my dad was a Robinson, and I know him and my mother got together and had a child out of wedlock, and all of that, and we can get into all of that. But I said, listen, I don't know about all that. It was a time that they used to trip me out, and I was upset with mama and daddy because they never got together, and daddy was living this kind of life, and mama was living this kind of life, and all of that crazy stuff. But listen, but when God has a plan for you,
that's right.
it ain't got nothing to do with mom and dad. Listen, he said, I'm going to put the people together that I need to generate you for my purpose.
That's right.
For my plan. So you need to put the devil in check right now. You ought to let him know. It don't matter what you say. I was made for a reason. And so he put my mom and daddy together, crazy teenagers that thought they was in love and all of that crazy stuff. And here comes Kevin. And listen, no. But then there's an issue because I was the only boy. They didn't have no sons. My grandfather didn't have no sons. And so they decided to give my last name Brown instead of giving my father's last name. And my daddy got mad about it and got all upset, and then it created some dissension. Fast forward, I look back now over the life. Love daddy, don't get me wrong. Didn't want to be nothing like you. Being honest with you. I know now why God moved me. I didn't understand then. I look at the family differences and I said, my God, if I'd have been in that family, I would have been a drunk or I'd have been strung out or I'd have been all messed up. Because when I look at my cousins on that side of the family, when I look at how they line up and how they're living their life, and I look at the opposite side of my mother's family, my grandmama and all of them, I get excited because I could have been on the other side. God said, no. I used to get mad because I wasn't where daddy was. I wasn't in that place where he was when God said, I need to move you. It's going to be uncomfortable for a while. You're going to struggle, but I need to move you because I got some stuff for you. And if you're in that place, you can't get to this place. You're tripping. You're mad at God because you don't know why you are where you are. God said it's going to be rough for a little while, but you're going to be blessed. And so listen. I promise you I won't be long. So remain encouraged. Remember the promises of God. You got to remain patient for the provision for God. Listen. In this text, not only are they dealing with the loss, now they're starting to be multiple, still fruitful. But now they have the allegiance that they had because of the relationship from Joseph to the king. That's no longer in existence. The security that they had knowing that they had to deal with the king, because the king was cool with their king, their leader. That's gone. And so sometimes God will move people that you've gotten comfortable with because he's trying to validate himself to you. See, they got comfortable with Joseph. They got comfortable with the brothers leading, moving and all of them. They got comfortable. And so listen, God said, as the time once you are sitting by yourself, your faith can't line up with God just because of God. Listen, I'm trying to help you. Listen, your relationship to God can't be because of that. Once they are moved along, because they go, we all got to go. Listen, this body is going to go. It's going to go. And what's going to be left when mama goes, and daddy goes, grandmama's gone, it's going to be just you. And that's when you get to show if you're serious about your relationship. And God allows us to get to that place because he's trying to prove, he wants to see how authentic you are in your walk. That's it. Ain't no other reason for it. And when you're exposed, the question is, do you get to that place and freak out when crazy stuff comes? When you start dealing with the oppression of the world, of the life that you're walking in this life, when you're dealing with temptation and struggle, do you flip out or do you trust God? It's time. You may not, I'm not looking for you to answer it like right now, but the real truth, no, when you're dealing with a physical issue, emotional roller coasters, financial hardships, when you're dealing with lacking in your life, do you lose your mind or do you turn to your true God? Because listen, the validation of God in your life comes through oppression. And so sometimes the very reason that we're struggling with being blessed is because when the oppression comes, we flip out and we lose our mind. We start turning to worldly stuff, and God's going, oh, I thought you was really with me. He said, I'm waiting to bless you. I'm waiting to pour out stuff to you. I want to use you to show the world how good I am.
Yeah.
I thought you were ready, but I'll wait a little while longer. They're dealing with the struggle of life. And here they are in the struggle of life, the oppression that they're dealing with. God is still waiting to be your provider. And even though they're dealing with a king who now looks at them as a threat, God still says, in spite of your dealing with your hardship, in spite of dealing with your oppression, in spite of dealing with all of that, I'm still going to multiply you. I'm still going to bless you. I'm still going to let you be free. And in your mind, listen, hold up. If you get to that place where you're starting to depend on the people so much that you don't have a relationship with yourself, you can't see God for yourself. You can't talk to God for yourself. You can't pray to God for yourself. Then God will allow that relationship to start to separate, to test the season of your faith. I'm trying to help you understand. Listen, what I'm trying to get you to see is why some of us are going through some of the struggle we're going through. God's just he's trying to validate himself in your life. And listen, the pressing on you, what you're dealing with, what you're going through, is simply the love that God has for you to show you, to give you the opportunity to truly worship him for yourself in spirit and in truth, so that everything that you are getting is truly for you. It ain't no confusion about, listen, daddy got his own relationship. Mama got, they getting their stuff is directly for them, it's lined up for them. What I have for you is for you, but I need for you to show me that you're ready. I need for you to show me that you're truly in it for me, not for what I can do for you. And so in this relationship, God, the patience that we have to have is listen, we have to trust and believe that while we're dealing with the waves of life, that God still provides for us. That requires patience. Because listen, the real truth be told, because when we're dealing with it, we have a tendency to start trying to fix it ourselves. We're trying to find our own solutions, even if it means we got to rob Peter to pay Paul. You got to be careful robbing anybody. I'm just being honest. But Peter, leave that alone. If you start, but listen, you start manipulating the situation for yourself. I just do this, and one nobody know. Listen, people know my situation. God, well, God, you know. He said, I thought you said you trusted me. I thought you said you believed in me. You think I'm going to bring you this far and leave you now? Yeah, I know this is your first step of faith. I know this is your first time taking this step. I know, but listen, I didn't bring you to, I know exactly what you've been dealing with. That's why I came into your life. Yeah, that's why you're dealing with some of this oppressed situation. Because I'm trying to get the good stuff, the stuff that I placed in you from day one. I'm trying to get to it. I'm trying to get at it. And listen, in order for me to get the best out of you, I gotta press you. I gotta push on you, and I gotta bend you, and I gotta twist you, and I'm gonna push you in places you don't want to go. And listen, and when you get into some of these places, you're going to run into some folk that look at you in a threatening situation. They're looking at your progress. They're looking at your walk, and they're starting to get a little twist. Why is she moving ahead of me? How can he be where he is? Even though all the stuff they've been dealing with, he ain't been perfect. His walk ain't always been clean and upright. But all of a sudden, you're starting to move ahead of some folk, and they're getting jealous. You're a threat to them. The word here uses, he says, dreaded, fear. That's what that means. They were fearful of them. It was some folk that was weak. They ain't had no big armed war. They ain't had no big war tactics and all this. They were just some simple folks following God. But because of their obedience to God, how they was perceived on the outside was different than how they was operating on the inside. This king, he goes to his people and he starts talking crazy. And listen, he starts talking crazy and trying to get them to line up against him. Because his whole mission is to stop your spiritual growth, your development. Because the more you develop, the stronger you get. And so in your growth, in your pressing moments, you have to not just remain encouraged, and you have to be patient. You have to also reject the enemy. Listen, because the enemy's going to come and try to talk to you and convince you to get on board with them, because if you stay, you might get destroyed. He'll present to you the option of changing sides, because he'll make his side look so good that you almost start to question your walk with God. I don't know who that's for. I'm trying to help you. Listen, I've been there. I'm trying to pray, and I'm reading my Bible, I'm worshiping, I'm coming to Bible study, and I'm still dealing with this crazy stuff. But I'm looking at folk out here rolling, and they got it going on. Every time they look up, they at the mall, and they got that gleam on, and I'm like, God, what's up? I don't understand. And the enemy will be in your ear. It's so real. Why you dealing with all these? If it's so real, why you struggling? You ought to start dealing with what they need. Look at what they got. Look how they roll. And they done moved up 3 times on their job. And you still struggle. Because the mirage will show you is nothing but a lie. So your faith will have to remain until you have a relationship with you. You reject what they're offering and trust God. Don't get no second, third job so you get that house. No, that's a lie. No, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't go out there. Don't buy that kilo or that bag, and don't listen to him. Yeah, don't, and make it. I can make it real quick. I can get that money, and I can do what I gotta do, and I won't do it for one time. That's a lie. Do not fall into the tricks and the schemes of the enemy. That's what the word says. When God told him, he said, listen, he told Jeremiah the same thing a while back. He said, listen. He said, don't listen to the false prophets. Don't listen, because they lying. Their whole objective is to get you off track because they see your growth. They see you growing, even in your oppressed situation, even in your struggle. They see you growing, and it's scaring the heck out of them. They can't deal with it. They don't understand it. It's beyond their comprehension. So they got to create something to get you off track. They got to come up with something to get you to fall, to get you to change who you are, who you're becoming. But if you stay the course, if you stay your hand in his hand, if you continue to follow and thirst and seek after more knowledge, a greater relationship with him, if you're in your Bible study, continue to study the word for yourself, continue to seek Jesus for yourself, continue to have a relationship with him. I promise you'll get to the final end. Because in the end, you'll be able to rejoice in the blessings of God. And listen, the last thing I share with you, in order for you to rejoice in the blessings of God, you got to be willing to get pressed on. It's that simple. You got to be willing to get pressed on. And listen, there's some people in here right now. You've been pressed on, but you ain't believing the reason you're being pressed is going to be blessed. You're convinced that your pressing is because of some great stuff. But God said, no. It's because I see stuff in you that I want to get out. And listen, yeah, you're struggling. Yeah, you're dealing with some stuff. But if you stay with me, I promise you, seek me and I'll add everything. There's some people in here, the enemy has tried to convince you that that's a lie, but I'm here to witness on your behalf. I'm here to witness on God's behalf. That if you stay faithful and obedient to him, he'll take you to a level you never thought you would experience. He'll bless you in your areas of your life, and not just yours, but if you look at the text, Joseph's obedience not just blessed him, but it blessed his fruit, it blessed his loins, it blessed his offspring, it blessed his family, and all of the people that was connected to him were blessed. And even when the oppressor, even when the enemy came and tried to cause them to fall, they still stayed obedient and still multiplied. And the enemy kept coming up with other schemes and tricks, trying to destroy. The last point I'll share with you is even though they went through this level of oppression, and they were still growing, the enemy couldn't figure it out. He didn't understand it. And the last thing he came up with was he tried to get to the seed. If you look at the text, and this is going on into read for yourself. Out of this comes Moses. So the enemy is still trying to get the midwives, the deliverers of the babies, to kill the seed, the sons, men, because he knew out of the men were the seed to their growth. In our relationships, God has given us the fruit, the seed to develop, the seeds to plant, the seeds to sow into other folks' lives. Who are you sowing into so that they can grow and be a part of it? Our relationship to God, our connection to God is critical. Your seed is not for you. You have to plant it someplace. being pressed, and you don't understand. You didn't understand it before today. But guess what? You ought to celebrate your pressing season. You ought to celebrate your pressing season. Because it's during the pressing season that you are blessed. God is validating himself in your life during the pressing season. Would you stand? Listen. Today, somebody came in with a mind of oppression. But the difference is that your mind, the enemy had convinced you that your oppression was because of all of the negativity. But God said, no, 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 no. Listen, hold up. No. The pressing that you're going through is because of the good stuff I'm trying to get out of you. And so you ought to be able to tell the enemy when you're dealing with your press situation. He's trying to convince you that it's negative. You ought to say, no, no. God told me that if I stay with him in my pressing season, I'll get to rejoice in the blessings. You got to trust the pressing is for your good. Put your hands lifted and your heart centered on God. Lord God, we thank you, Father, for your word today. But I pray that somebody will hear from you. And they will come today trusting and believing that the reason for the pressing is to grow them to a whole nother level, to increase them, and show yourself to them, to validate yourself through them, so that the world knows that you are God and all by yourself. So, Lord God, I pray right now that the people under the sound of my voice will today learn that the pressing is for the blessing, and they will step out on faith today, knowing that whatever they're dealing with is only for the blessing that's yet to come. So, Lord God, if there's someone else that came in today that did not know you or had no relationship with you, Lord God, I pray today that they'll make a decision to come out, unite themselves with you. And Father God, if there's someone else here, Lord God, that may have had a relationship, but somehow they got outside of your safety, of your protection, and got turned around, Lord God, they can come back home. They can reunite their life with you. So, Lord God, I pray with the sound of my voice that some lost soul will give somebody